Evelyn has always existed in the periphery of her own life. As the eldest daughter in a deeply dysfunctional family, her childhood was defined by silent sacrifice, overshadowed by her younger sister Chloe's constant manufactured crises. Her needs and achievements were consistently overlooked. As her 18th birthday approaches, Evelyn holds on to a fragile hope for acknowledgement, only for Chloe to orchestrate another dramatic crisis, swiftly dismissing Evelyn's milestone. This final act of dismissal shatters Evelyn's last vestiges of hope, replaced by a chilling, resolute calm. With newfound clarity, she makes the audacious decision to meticulously pack a small bag, severing ties and stepping into the unknown to finally become the main character in her own story. The dust motes dancing in the shaft of late afternoon sunlight were the only things in the house that moved without a purpose. I watched them swirl above my desk, suspended in the golden haze, while the rest of my world operated on a strict, unspoken grid of cause and effect. On the surface of my desk, 3 textbooks were arranged in a perfect triptych: AP Calculus, European History, and a battered copy of Jane Eyre. I wasn't studying. Not really. I was waiting. The silence in the house was heavy, a physical weight that pressed against my eardrums. It wasn't a peaceful quiet. It was the intake of breath before a scream. It was the tension of a rubber band stretched to its breaking point. I looked at the digital clock on my nightstand. 4:12 p.m. Any minute now. I turned the page of my history book, the paper whispering against my fingertips. The intricate political alliances of the 19th century felt soothingly logical compared to the ecosystem downstairs. Here, actions had consequences. Treaties were signed. Borders were drawn. In my house, boundaries were permeable, shifting things that only applied to me, never to anyone else. The front door slammed downstairs. The vibration traveled up the support beams, rattling the empty picture frame on my dresser. "Mom!" The shriek tore through the floorboards. It wasn't a cry of pain, though a stranger might have thought so. It was the specific, high-pitched frequency of Chloe, a sound designed to shatter peace and summon attention like a dog whistle. I closed my eyes for a second, inhaling the scent of old paper and lemon furniture polish, grounding myself before the descent. I carefully marked my page. I didn't slam the book shut. I didn't run. I moved with the practiced invisibility of a ghost haunting her own life. When I reached the top of the stairs, the performance had already moved to the kitchen. The hallway was a tunnel of beige carpet and family photos, mostly Chloe at various stages of development. Chloe with a soccer ball, Chloe in her ballet tutu, Chloe winning the middle school talent show. There was one photo of me, tucked near the edge of the frame, half shadowed by a tree during a family picnic 3 years ago. I walked down the stairs, my socks making no sound. The kitchen was an explosion of noise and movement. My mother, Sarah, was standing by the granite island, her hands covered in flour, a dish rag thrown haphazardly over her shoulder. Her face was pinched with that familiar mix of exhaustion and frantic concern that only Chloe could elicit. And there was Chloe, sprawled across one of the high-backed bar stools, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders heaving with theatrical sobs. Her backpack was dumped in the middle of the floor, a trip hazard for anyone actually trying to navigate the room. "He didn't just say it, Mom," Chloe wailed, lifting her head to reveal mascara tracks running down her cheeks like war paint. "He looked right through me, like I was nothing." I stepped into the kitchen. Neither of them looked up. I was part of the furniture, less interesting than the refrigerator. "Oh, sweetie," Mom cooed, reaching out to stroke Chloe's hair, leaving a faint dusting of flour on the brunette's strands. "Boys are stupid. You know that. Tyler doesn't know what he's losing." "It's not just Tyler," Chloe screamed, slamming her hand onto the counter. The fruit bowl jumped. "It's the whole group. If he dumps me, I lose the bonfire party on Saturday. I lose everything. My social life is literally dead. Dead." I walked past them to the stove. The pot of water Mom had put on for pasta was boiling over, hissing as the starchy water hit the burner. I turned the knob down, grabbed a wooden spoon, and laid it across the top of the pot to settle the foam. "Saturday is the bonfire?" Mom asked, her voice soft, placating. "Well, maybe we can do something else. Just us girls, a spa day?" "I don't want a spa day." Chloe choked out, a fresh wave of tears spilling over. "I want my life back. You don't understand. Nobody understands. It feels like my chest is being ripped open." I opened the pantry door quietly, taking out the jar of marinara sauce. I checked the expiration date, habit, and popped the seal. The pop was sharp, but it didn't register over Chloe's monologue. "I'm sure it feels that way, baby," Mom said, abandoning the dinner prep entirely to wrap her arms around my sister. "But you are strong. You are so beautiful and talented. He's just a high school boy." "He was my soulmate." I poured the sauce into a saucepan and set it to simmer. I began chopping the bell peppers that Mom had left half-finished on the cutting board. Chop, slide, chop, slide. The rhythm was steady, a counterbeat to the erratic tempo of Chloe's grief. Tyler was not her soulmate. Tyler was a lacrosse player who chewed gum with his mouth open and had forgotten her birthday 2 months ago. I remembered because I was the one who drove her to the mall at 9 p.m. to buy herself a comfort gift, which she then told our parents Tyler had bought her. "Evelyn," Mom said, suddenly realizing I was there. She didn't turn her head, just projected her voice over Chloe's shoulder. "Can you handle the garlic bread? Chloe is having a hard time." "Already in the oven," I said. My voice sounded rusty, unused. "Thanks," Mom breathed, turning her attention back to the weeping girl in her arms. "Did you hear that, Chloe? We'll have a nice carb-heavy dinner, garlic bread, comfort food. We'll make it all better." I watched them for a moment. The way Mom held her, the way the kitchen light caught the tears on Chloe's cheeks, making them look like diamonds. It was a beautiful tableau of maternal love, exclusive and impenetrable. I was 18 in 4 days. 4 days. The number hung in my mind, glowing and significant. 18. Adulthood. Escape. I had been dropping hints for weeks. Subtle ones, because I learned long ago that direct requests were easily deflected. I left brochures for a local bistro on the counter. I mentioned how my friend Maya had a small dinner party. I just wanted one night, one dinner where the conversation didn't revolve around Chloe's grades, Chloe's friends, or Chloe's hair. The back door opened, bringing a gust of cool autumn air into the humid kitchen. Dad walked in, loosening his tie, his briefcase swinging by his side. He looked tired, the lines around his eyes etched deep by corporate fatigue. He stopped when he saw the scene. He looked at me, standing by the stove with a wooden spoon, and then at the huddle of weeping women by the island. "What happened?" he asked, dropping his briefcase by the door. "Tyler broke up with her?" Mom whispered, as if announcing a terminal diagnosis. Dad's face softened instantly. He bypassed me completely, walking straight to Chloe. He placed a large, comforting hand on her back. "Oh, Pumpkin. That guy? He's a jerk. I never liked him." Chloe released Mom and threw herself at Dad, burying her face in his suit jacket. "Daddy, it hurts so much." "I know, Pumpkin, I know." He kissed the top of her head. "We'll fix it, whatever you need. You want ice cream? You want me to go get that expensive gelato from the place downtown?" "The pistachio kind?" Chloe sniffled, looking up with wide, wet eyes. "Gallons of it," Dad promised. "I'll go right after dinner." I turned back to the stove. The steam from the pasta water rose up, dampening my face. I stirred the sauce, watching the red swirls, thinking about the calendar in my room. "Dinner is ready," I said to the pot of sauce. "Just a minute, Evie," Dad said, his voice distracted. "Let your sister compose herself." I turned off the burner. I carried the bowl of pasta to the table. I set out the forks. I brought the salad. I brought the garlic bread, perfectly toasted just the way they liked it. Eventually, they migrated to the table. The atmosphere was somber, like a wake for a relationship that had lasted 3 weeks. Chloe picked at her food, sighing loudly every few minutes. Mom and Dad watched her with hawk-like intensity, tracking every forkful of pasta she managed to swallow as if it were a medical miracle. "I just don't know what I'm going to do about the weekend," Chloe murmured, stabbing a piece of lettuce. "I can't show my face." "We could take a trip," Mom suggested, looking at Dad. "Maybe go up to the lake house? Just get away from everything?" My fork paused halfway to my mouth. The lake house. 3 hours away. No cell service. Just the 4 of us, trapped in a cabin, catering to Chloe's heartbreak. "This weekend?" I asked. The words came out sharper than I intended. 3 pairs of eyes turned to me. Mom looked confused. Dad looked annoyed at the interruption. Chloe looked tragic. "Yes, this weekend," Dad said. "Ideally. Chloe needs a change of scenery." "But," I started, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Tuesday is my birthday." The silence that followed was different from the silence in my room. It was awkward, clumsy. "Well, yes," Mom said, recovering first. "Tuesday, but this is the weekend. We'd be back by Monday night." "We would?" I asked. "Usually when we go to the lake, we stay until Tuesday morning to beat traffic." "We can leave early," Dad said, waving his hand dismissively. "The point is, your sister is hurting right now. We need to prioritize mental health. We can have cake at the cabin. It'll be nice. Rustic." "Rustic," I repeated. "I don't even know if I want to go to the lake," Chloe whimpered. "It's so quiet there. It gives me too much time to think." "We'll bring movies," Mom promised. "We'll bring games. It will be a distraction." They turned back to her, the brief interruption of my existence already forgotten. The conversation flowed over me like water around a stone. They planned the snacks. They planned the departure time. They discussed which of Chloe's friends might be supportive enough to invite along for moral support. I looked down at my plate. The pasta was cold. Inside my chest, something small and fragile was trembling. It was the hope I had been nurturing for months. The hope that 18 would be different. That 18 meant I was an adult, a person worthy of individual recognition. I had imagined a dinner at that Italian place, downtown, the one with the white tablecloths. I had imagined a toast. To Evelyn, for her straight A's, for her quiet strength, for being our daughter. Instead, I was staring down the barrel of a weekend spent playing Scrabble in a damp cabin while Chloe cried over a boy whose last name she probably couldn't spell. "May I be excused?" I asked. "Did you finish your vegetables?" Mom asked automatically, not looking away from Chloe. "Yes, go ahead. Don't stay up too late studying." I stood up, taking my plate to the sink. I rinsed it. I loaded it into the dishwasher. I wiped down the spot on the table where I had eaten. I did all of this with mechanical precision, leaving no trace that I had been there at all. As I walked back toward the hallway, the sound of their voices merged into a singular hum of shared intimacy. "You're the best daughter," I heard Dad say. He was talking to Chloe. I climbed the stairs one by one. The carpet felt rough under my feet. When I reached the top, I walked into my room and closed the door. The silence rushed back in to meet me, but this time it felt colder. I sat at my desk and looked at the triptych of books. I looked at the calendar on the wall. October 14th was circled in red ink. Evelyn's 18th. I had written it myself. I picked up the red pen. I hovered the tip over the weekend dates leading up to the 14th. I thought about crossing them out, blacking them out until the paper tore. Instead, I set the pen down. I opened Jane Eyre. "I am no bird, and no net ensnares me. I am a free human being with an independent will. I read the line 3 times. Downstairs, a burst of laughter erupted. Dad must have cracked a joke to cheer Chloe up. It was a loud, booming sound that shook the floorboards. I looked at the small duffel bag sitting in the top of my closet. I had bought it with my own money from tutoring, hiding it behind my winter coats. I hadn't known exactly why I bought it at the time. I told myself it was for college. But as the laughter from the kitchen swirled up through the vents, mocking the silence of my room, I realized I wasn't waiting for college. I was waiting for permission, and looking at the closed door, realizing that no one had followed me up. No one had asked if I was okay. No one had remembered that I existed outside of my utility to them. I realized that permission wasn't something they were ever going to give me. I turned back to my calculus textbook, but the numbers swam before my eyes. The equation remained unbalanced. The variable was me, and I was tired of being solved for 0. The kitchen table had always been the centerpiece of our family's silent disconnect. A slab of scarred oak that held more unspoken resentments than actual meals. It was Tuesday evening, the air thick with the smell of roasted chicken and the lingering metallic scent of floor wax. My parents were physically present, occupying their usual territories. Dad hidden behind the glowing rectangle of his tablet. Mom aggressively scrubbing a spot on the counter that had been cleaned 10 minutes ago, but they were miles away in spirit. I sat with my hands clasped tight in my lap, squeezing my fingers until the knuckles turned the color of old bone. This was the moment I had rehearsed in the shower, on the bus ride home, and in the quiet dark of my bedroom for weeks. The words felt heavy on my tongue, like stones I had to vomit up or choke on. Mom? Dad? The silence stretched for a beat too long. Dad didn't look up, his thumb swiping upward in a rhythmic, hypnotic motion. Mom paused her scrubbing, the sponge hovering over the granite, but her shoulders remained tense, raised toward her ears as if anticipating a blow. Mom finally hummed, her voice tight. Did you finish the laundry, Evelyn? I think Chloe left her gym clothes on the bathroom floor again. I did, I said, my voice sounding smaller than I intended. I cleared my throat, forcing volume into it. I did the laundry, but I wanted to talk about something else, about Saturday. Dad's eyes flickered up, though his face remained slack, his mind still half caught in whatever news article he was digesting. Saturday? What Saturday? Do we have a function? No, I said, fighting the urge to retreat, to just say, never mind, and dissolve back into the scenery. It's my birthday. I'm turning 18. The realization hit them with a delay that stung more than immediate forgetfulness would have. It was a slow dawning, a recalibration of their mental calendars. Mom turned around, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her expression softening into something that resembled guilt, though it was shallow. 18, she breathed, a practiced smile plastering itself onto her face. My goodness, 18 already. I swear you were just starting kindergarten yesterday. I was thinking, I pressed on, ignoring the cliché, desperate to secure the territory before it could be invaded. Since it's a big one, maybe we could go out. Just the 3 of us. Or the 4 of us if Chloe wants to come. But I'd really like to go to the Glass Olive. Just for a quiet dinner. No phones, just us. It was a modest request. The Glass Olive was nice, but not exorbitant. It was the kind of place where people spoke in hushed tones and the napkins were made of real linen. It was a place for adults. I wanted to sit at a table with them and be treated not as the housekeeper, not as the mediator, but as a daughter crossing a threshold. Dad finally set the tablet down on the table, screen side down. A miracle. 18 is a milestone, Evie. You're right. We should do something proper. So, dinner? I asked, looking between them. I felt like a beggar holding out a tin cup, loathing the gratitude that was already welling up in my chest for the bare minimum. 7 p.m.? I don't see why not, Mom said, leaning back against the counter, her eyes actually focusing on me. For a second, just a second, I felt seen. She tilted her head, looking at me not as a utility but as a person. We can get you a nice cake too. Chocolate ganache? You still like that? I love that, I said. The knot in my stomach began to loosen, replaced by a fluttering warmth. It was a fragile thing, this hope. It felt like holding a soap bubble in the palm of my hand. Beautiful, refracting the light, but liable to burst if anyone breathed too hard. Thank you. Really, it means a lot to me. It's a date, Dad declared, tapping the table twice with his knuckles as if sealing a business deal. Saturday, the glass olive. We'll celebrate our big girl. For the next 20 minutes, the kitchen felt different. The air was lighter. I stood up to help clear the few dishes from Dad's snack, and Mom actually told me to sit down, that she would handle it. I sat there, tracing the grain of the wood with my fingertip, allowing myself to imagine the night. I pictured the candlelight reflecting in the wine glasses. I would be legal to have a glass of wine, wouldn't I? I pictured them asking me about my university applications, about my thoughts on the world, actually listening to the answers. Then the thought came. It wasn't a loud crash, but a dull, heavy sound from the floor above, followed immediately by a sharp, strangled cry. The atmosphere in the kitchen shattered instantly. The warmth evaporated, sucked out of the room by a sudden vacuum of panic. Mom dropped the dish towel. It hit the floor with a wet plop. Dad was out of his chair before the echo of the cry had even faded. Chloe? Mom gasped. The name a reflex? A prayer? They rushed to the bottom of the stairs just as Chloe appeared at the top. She wasn't bleeding. She wasn't broken. But she was gripping the banister with a white-knuckled intensity that suggested she was hanging over a precipice. Her face was pale, or perhaps just devoid of makeup, and her other hand was clutching her chest right over her heart. "Mom!" she wheezed, her voice trembling with a theatrical vibrato. I can't catch my breath. It's happening again." I stood in the doorway of the kitchen, watching the scene unfold with a creeping sense of inevitability. The "it" she referred to was a vague, undiagnosed constellation of symptoms that migrated around her body depending on the week. Sometimes it was a migraine that required total darkness and silence. Sometimes it was a mysterious joint pain that absolved her of chores. Today, it seemed, it was palpitations. "Breathe, baby, breathe." Mom cooed, rushing up the stairs to wrap an arm around Chloe's waist. Dad was right behind her, his face etched with a worry that I had never, not once in 18 years, seen directed at me. "Is it the palpitations? Is your heart racing?" "It feels like it's fluttering," Chloe whimpered, leaning her full weight against Mom, causing our mother to stagger slightly. "And I got so dizzy, I almost fell down the stairs. I saw spots, Mom, big black spots." "Okay, let's get you to the sofa," Dad commanded, taking charge, his earlier promise of a dinner date already dissolving into the ether. "Easy now, don't rush." They guided her down the stairs like she was made of spun sugar. I had to step back into the kitchen to make room for the procession. Chloe's eyes were half closed, her head lolling back against Dad's shoulder. But as they passed the kitchen doorway, her gaze flickered toward me. For a nanosecond, the distress cleared, and I saw the glint of calculation, sharp, aware, and triumphant. Then, her eyelids fluttered shut again, and she let out a moan of distress. "Water, Evelyn, get her water," Mom barked. Her voice had shifted from the gentle coo used for Chloe to the sharp utilitarian snap she reserved for me. I moved automatically. I went to the fridge, filled a glass, and walked into the living room. Chloe was deposited onto the plush sofa, legs elevated on a pillow. Dad hovering with his fingers on her wrist, checking a pulse that I suspected was perfectly normal. "Here," I said, extending the glass. Mom snatched it from my hand, spilling a little on the carpet. But she didn't notice. "Here, sweetie. Sip. Small sips." I stood by the armrest, feeling like an intruder in my own home. The date on Saturday felt a million miles away, obscured by the immediate gravity of Chloe's performance. I knew I should stay silent. I knew the script required me to fade into the background, to become the invisible support staff. But the memory of the kitchen table, the promise, the acknowledgement was too fresh. It burned in my throat. "Is she okay?" I asked, my voice flat. "Because we were just talking about Saturday. I need to make the reservation if we're going." The room went silent, save for Chloe's ragged, performative breathing. Dad looked up at me, his brow furrowed, as if I had just spoken in a foreign language. "Reservation? Evelyn, not now!" "But you said—" "I know what I said!" Dad snapped, the stress in his voice manifesting as anger toward the easiest target. "But look at your sister. She nearly passed out on the stairs. We don't know what's wrong. We might have to take her to urgent care if this doesn't settle. It's my 18th birthday," I said. I hated how pathetic I sounded. I hated that I was begging for scraps of their attention while Chloe feasted on the whole loaf. "You promised." Chloe let out a sob, curling tighter into a ball. "I'm sorry," she wept, her voice muffled by the cushions. "I'm sorry I'm ruining everything. Just go. Go have dinner. Leave me here. I don't want to be a burden." It was a master stroke, a precision strike. "Oh, stop it, Chloe," Mom said, stroking her hair frantically. "You are not a burden. Don't you ever say that." She turned to me, her eyes flashing with cold fire. "Evelyn, honestly, how can you be so selfish right now? Your sister is having a medical episode and you're worried about a birthday dinner?" "I'm not being selfish," I argued, though my voice was shaking. "I just wanted one night. I just wanted to know if we're still doing it." "We will see," Mom said, turning her back on me to focus on Chloe. "We will see how she feels. If she's not up to it, we obviously can't leave her alone. And we certainly aren't going to drag her to a restaurant if she's dizzy." "I could go alone with you guys," I suggested, knowing as I said it that it was doomed. "Chloe could stay with Grandma, or she could just stay here for 2 hours. Leave her alone?" Dad looked appalled. "Evelyn, enough. We have to prioritize. We'll celebrate your birthday. We'll get a cake. But right now, we need to focus on this. Focus on this. The mantra of my entire existence. Focus on the crisis. Focus on the noise. Focus on Chloe." I looked at my sister. She was peering at me through the gap in her messy hair. She wasn't crying anymore. She was just watching, waiting to see if I would push harder, ready to escalate her symptoms if I did. If I argued, she would faint. If I yelled, she would vomit. She held the nuclear codes to the family's emotional state, and she had her finger hovering over the button. "Fine," I whispered. "What?" Mom asked, distracted, checking Chloe's forehead for a fever that didn't exist. "I said fine," I repeated, louder this time, though neither of them turned to look. "I'll get the ice pack." I turned and walked out of the living room, the sounds of their soothing murmurs following me like a ghost. "It's okay, baby, we've got you. Just breathe." Back in the kitchen, the light seemed harsher, colder. The spot on the counter Mom had been scrubbing was still damp. The tablet sat on the table where Dad had left it. I walked over to the freezer and opened the door, the icy mist hitting my face. I stared at the frost-covered bags of peas and the stack of ice trays. My hands were trembling, not from fear, and not from sadness. It was a vibration deep in my marrow, a frequency of realization that was becoming impossible to ignore. They had promised. For 20 minutes, they had been my parents, and it had taken less than 30 seconds for Chloe to strip that away. It was and that they loved her more, though it certainly felt that way. It was that her demand for love was a screaming siren, and mine was a silent frequency they had forgotten how to tune into. I grabbed the gel pack from the shelf, the cold stinging my fingers. I would bring it to them. I would play the part of the dutiful daughter one more time. I would let them think that I accepted the "we'll see," that I believed the vague assurances that we would celebrate later. But as I closed the freezer door, I looked at the calendar hanging on the wall. Saturday, the 18th. The square was blank. No one had written anything down. I didn't cry. The tears I expected to feel were absent, replaced by a dry, hollow ache in the center of my chest. It was the feeling of a bridge collapsing, slow and silent into deep water. I knew with a terrifying clarity that Saturday would come and go, and we would not be at the Glass Olive. We would be here in this house, revolving around the sun that was Chloe, while I stood in the shadows, blowing out a candle on a store-bought cake that no one really wanted to eat. I gripped the ice pack tighter, the cold seeping into my skin, numbing the nerves. "Coming!" I called out to the living room, my voice steady, devoid of hope, devoid of expectation. I walked back toward the living room, walking toward the people who gave me life, but had no idea how to watch me live it. The promise remained unspoken, hanging in the hallway like stale smoke. Already dissipating, already forgotten. The morning sunlight hit the faded beige carpet of my bedroom with a cruel, cheerful indifference. It was a Tuesday. It was quiet, the kind of stillness that usually precedes a storm in this house. But for a singular, suspended moment, the dust motes dancing in the shaft of light were the only things moving. I lay still, staring at the ceiling where a water stain shaped like obscure geography had been my morning companion for a decade. Today, the geography looked different. Today, I was 18. The number felt heavy in my chest, not with the buoyancy of freedom I had read about in books, but with the density of a stone dropped into a deep well. I waited. It was a childish reflex, one I thought I had strangled out of myself years ago. But there it was, the waiting. I waited for the sound of footsteps rushing to my door. I waited for the smell of blueberry pancakes, a tradition that had died when I was 7 and Chloe was born. I waited for the door to creak open and for my mother's face to appear, softened by the significance of the day. Holding a card, a cupcake, anything. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The silence remained unbroken, save for the distant, familiar hum of the refrigerator downstairs. I swung my legs out of bed, the floorboards cold against my bare feet. I dressed slowly, pulling on jeans and a sweater that had seen better days, smoothing the fabric down with hands that trembled slightly. "Stop it," I told myself. "Don't do this. Don't build the pedestal just to throw yourself off it." But the conversation from 3 days ago lingered, a ghostly echo. "We'll go to that little Italian place, Evie," my father had said, his eyes briefly meeting mine before darting back to the television. "Just the 3 of us, maybe 4, if Chloe is up to it. But it's your night. 18. That's big." It was the "that's big" that had hooked me. It was the acknowledgement of magnitude. I opened my bedroom door and stepped into the hallway. The air in the house felt different today, tight, pressurized. As I descended the stairs, the sensory landscape shifted from the sterile silence of the upstairs to the chaotic frequency of the ground floor. I could hear the clattering of dishes, the sharp intake of breath, the low murmur of urgent voices. I walked into the kitchen. The scene before me was a tableau of dysfunction, so familiar it should have been boring, yet today it felt like a physical slap. My mother was leaning over the granite island, her knuckles white as she gripped the phone receiver, the cord tangled around her wrist like a handcuff. Her hair was unwashed, pulled back in a severe, messy bun. My father was pacing the small stretch of linoleum between the stove and the sink, holding a glass of water and a bottle of pills. And there, sitting at the kitchen table wrapped in a fleece blanket, despite the thermostat being set to 72, was Chloe. She looked small, frail by design, her eyes wide and glassy. She wasn't crying. She never cried when she wanted something. She just looked fading. It was her best performance. No one looked up when I entered. I stood by the refrigerator, a ghost in my own home, watching the scene play out. "I don't know, Dr. Evans," my mother said into the phone, her voice pitching up into that frantic register she reserved solely for Chloe's ailments. "She says her vision is blurry. She can't stand up without getting dizzy. Yes, since 4 this morning. No fever." My father stopped pacing and looked at me. For a second, just a split second, I saw a flicker of recognition in his eyes. He looked at the calendar on the wall, then back at me. The realization hit him, and he flinched. "Evie?" he said, his voice low. "Morning," I said. My voice sounded foreign, scratchy and unused. Chloe groaned, a low, pitiful sound that drew the room's gravity instantly back to her. She slumped forward, resting her forehead on the placemat. "Make it stop," Chloe whispered. "The lights are too bright." My mother slammed the phone down. Okay, baby. We're going to the urgent care. No, we're going to the ER. Dr. Evans thinks it might be a vestibular migraine, but we can't rule out inner ear infection or..." She trailed off, her eyes wild, finally landing on me. She blinked, as if trying to place my face. "Evelyn. Good. You're up." "I'm up," I repeated. "I need you to grab your sister's bag. The red one. Pack her charger, her iPad, and the noise-canceling headphones. We have to go now." I didn't move. I stood rooted to the spot, my hands clenching at my sides. "Mom. Evelyn, please. Not now. Look at her." She gestured frantically toward Chloe, who was now massaging her temples with theatrical slowness. "It's the 18th, I said. It wasn't a shout. It was a statement of fact dropped into the chaos like a coin into a fountain. My mother froze. She looked at the calendar, then at me, then back to Chloe. The conflict played out on her face, the guilt warring with the addiction to the crisis. "I know," she said, her voice dropping, breathless. "I know what day it is, Evie. But look at this. Look at what's happening." "You promised dinner," I said. I felt the old sting behind my eyes, the pressure of tears wanting to fall, but I held them back. I needed them to hear me, not just see me cry. "The Italian place. You promised." "Evelyn." My father snapped, the stress fracturing his patience. "For God's sake, your sister can barely see straight. We can't go out to dinner. How can you be so selfish right now?" The word hung in the air. Selfish. "Selfish?" I asked, the word tasting like ash. "I asked for 2 hours. I asked for pasta and a conversation. I haven't asked for anything in 3 years. "She's sick," my mother cried out, rushing to Chloe's side as Chloe let out another well-timed whimper. "My head feels like it's splitting," Chloe moaned, peeking out from under her arm to check the reaction. She caught my eye. There it was. It was subtle, barely a twitch of the corner of her mouth, but I saw it. The glint of victory, the satisfaction of the pull. She wasn't dizzy. She wasn't blind. She was terrified that for one evening, the sun might shine on someone else, so she had summoned a storm to block it out. "She's lying," I said. The silence that followed was absolute. My father stopped moving. My mother slowly straightened up, her face hardening into a mask of disbelief. "Excuse me?" my mother whispered. "She's lying," I said again, louder this time, my voice steadying. "She does this every time. The play. My graduation, now today. She isn't sick. She just needs you to look at her." "That is enough." My father stepped forward. his finger pointing aggressively at my face. "You get upstairs. Now. We are dealing with a medical emergency, and you are making this about yourself." "It is about me." I stepped forward, meeting his glare. "It's my birthday, Dad. I am 18 years old today. I am legally an adult, and I am standing in this kitchen begging you to remember that I exist." "We will celebrate later," he shouted, his face turning red. "We will get a cake next week. We will do the dinner when your sister is stable. Why can't you just wait? Why do you always have to keep score?" "Because the score is 0, I said. It's always 0. "I can't deal with this," my mother said, her voice trembling with hysteria. She grabbed her car keys from the counter. "I can't deal with your jealousy while your sister is in pain. Robert, get the car. Chloe, honey, can you walk?" "I think so," Chloe whispered, leaning heavily against the table as she stood. She looked at me, her eyes wide and innocent, mocking me with her frailty. "I'm sorry, Evie. I didn't mean to ruin your birthday." It was the apology that did it. It was the saccharine, poison-laced sweetness of it. My mother wrapped an arm around Chloe, supporting her weight. "Don't apologize to her, Chloe. She's being unreasonable." My father grabbed his wallet. He looked at me one last time, shaking his head. "We'll be back later. There's $20 on the counter. Order a pizza. We'll talk about this tomorrow." They shuffled toward the door, a three-headed beast of codependency. The door opened, letting in a gust of cool autumn air, and then it slammed shut. The lock clicked. The engine of the SUV roared to life in the driveway, and then the sound faded down the street. I was alone. I stood in the center of the kitchen. The $20 bill sat on the granite counter next to a half-empty cup of coffee my mother had abandoned. I waited for the crash. I waited for the sobbing, the hyperventilating, the urge to throw the coffee mug against the wall. I waited for the crushing weight of loneliness to buckle my knees. But it didn't come. Instead, a strange sensation washed over me. It started at my fingertips and moved inward, a cooling, numbing wave. It was like stepping out of a noisy, overheated party into a snowy night. The frantic noise in my head, the constant mental gymnastics of trying to justify their behavior, the pleading, the hoping, it just stopped. The silence in the house wasn't oppressive anymore. It was clarifying. I looked at the $20, a pizza. That was the value placed on 18 years of being the good one, the quiet one, the one who didn't make waves. A lukewarm pepperoni pizza, eaten alone in a silent kitchen, while they sat in a hospital waiting room, feeding the monster they had created. I walked over to the calendar on the wall. Evelyn's B-Day was scrawled in small black ink on the 14th. Chloe's A Specialist Apto was written in red, circled 3 times, dominating the 15th. I didn't feel angry. Anger implies passion, and passion implies investment. I realized, with a jolt of ice-cold lucidity, that I was no longer invested. I was watching a movie I had seen 1,000 times, and I was finally bored with the ending. I picked up the $20 bill. I smoothed it out against the counter. It was crisp. "Okay," I said aloud. The word hung there, unrefuted. There was no negotiation left to be had. I couldn't scream them into loving me. I couldn't perform goodness well enough to outshine Chloe's performance of crisis. The currency in this house was pain, and I refused to bankrupt myself trying to mint it. I looked around the kitchen one last time. I memorized the way the light hit the dirty dishes in the sink. I memorized the smell of the stale coffee. I memorized the feeling of the linoleum under my feet. I wasn't memorizing it to hold on to it. I was memorizing it to ensure I would never ever let myself return to a place that felt like this. My heartbeat, which had been hammering against my ribs during the argument, slowed to a steady rhythmic thrum. It was the heartbeat of a survivor who had just realized the war was over. I hadn't won, but I didn't have to fight anymore. I turned away from the kitchen, away from the empty promise of the dining room table, and walked toward the stairs. My steps were deliberate. I didn't run. I didn't rush. There was no need for haste. They would be at the ER for hours. Chloe would ensure they ran every test, and my parents would ensure they waited for every result. I had time. I climbed the stairs, my hand gliding over the banister. The wood felt smooth and cool. I reached the landing and walked down the hall to my room. Entering my bedroom felt different this time. 10 minutes ago, it had been a cell of disappointment. Now, it looked like a transit station. I looked at the bed, the desk, the shelves lined with books I had read to escape this life. They didn't look like mine anymore. They looked like artifacts from a museum exhibit about a girl who used to live here. I sat on the edge of the bed. I didn't cry. My eyes were dry, my vision sharper than it had ever been. The fog of familial obligation had lifted, blown away by the sheer force of their indifference. I understood now. The dinner wasn't postponed. The cake wasn't forgotten. I was the postponement. I was the thing they forgot. And if I stayed, if I ate that pizza and waited for them to come home and offered their half-hearted apologies, I would eventually disappear completely. I would become part of the wallpaper, a silent witness to the Chloe show until I withered away. I stood up. The decision didn't feel like a choice. It felt like gravity. It was simply what happened next. I reached under my bed and pulled out the duffel bag I used for gym class. I dusted it off. The silence in the room was profound. It wasn't the silence of neglect anymore. It was the silence of a blank page. It was the silence of the beginning. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the stale air of the house one last time, preparing to exhale it and never take it back in. "Happy birthday, Evelyn," I whispered to the empty room. And for the first time all day, I actually believed it. The silence in the house was not peaceful, it was heavy, a suffocating blanket, woven from years of unsaid words and swallowed grievances. It pressed against my eardrums, louder than the shouting match that had rattled the windows only hours before. The digital clock on my nightstand read 3:14 a.m. The red numbers stared back at me unblinking, marking the precise moment my life as a ghost in this family would end. I didn't tremble. That was the most surprising realization. My hands, usually prone to nervous fidgeting when I sensed a shift in the family dynamic, were steady. There was a clinical detachment to my movements, a cold precision that felt foreign, yet entirely necessary. I stood in the center of my room, the space I had occupied for 18 years, and realized with a pang of dull irony that I owned almost nothing. The furniture belonged to the house. The walls were painted a pale yellow my mother had chosen because she thought it was cheery, dismissing my request for blue. Even the air felt borrowed. I pulled my old canvas duffel bag from the top shelf of the closet. It smelled of dust and disuse. I unzipped it, the sound tearing through the quiet like a serrated knife, and I paused, holding my breath. I waited for the creak of floorboards down the hall, the inevitable intrusion of my mother checking to see if I was still awake, still available to soothe Chloe's post-tantrum anxieties. Nothing. Just the rhythmic low hum of the refrigerator downstairs and the settling of the house's timber frame. I began to pack. I didn't pack for sentiment. I packed for survival. 2 pairs of jeans, 3 t-shirts, the plain ones, not the hand-me-downs from Chloe that were too tight across the shoulders, a thick wool sweater, undergarments, socks, my toiletries bag stripped of anything unnecessary. I looked at the bookshelf where a collection of porcelain figurines gathered dust, gifts from aunts and uncles who didn't know what else to buy the quiet one. I left them. I looked at the framed photo from a family vacation to the coast 3 years ago. In the picture, Chloe was beaming in the center, flanked by my parents, I was half cut out of the frame on the left, my face obscured by shadow. I laid the photo face down on the dresser. It was a small act, petty perhaps, but it felt like closing a book. Next came the money. I knelt by the radiator. Prying loose the skirting board I had discovered was loose when I was 12. Inside was a Ziploc bag, flattened and dusty. I pulled it out and counted the cash by the moonlight filtering through the blinds. Babysitting money. Birthday checks from my grandmother before she passed. Allowances I had hoarded while Chloe spent hers on fast fashion and concert tickets. $840. It wasn't a fortune, it was barely a start, but it was mine. It was the currency of my freedom. I tucked the envelope deep into the inside pocket of my denim jacket. I zipped the bag. It wasn't heavy. That realization stung. 18 years of life condensed into 20 pounds of canvas. I slung it over my shoulder and took one last look around the room. I tried to feel sadness, tried to conjure up some nostalgia for the safety of these four walls, but the well was dry. This room hadn't been a sanctuary, it had been a waiting room. I opened my bedroom door. The hallway stretched out like a dark throat. I knew every loose board, every groan of the staircase. I navigated the carpeted path with the grace of a thief. Step, pause, listen. Step, pause, listen. As I passed Chloe's door, I stopped. It was slightly ajar, a habit she insisted on because she claimed the dark was suffocating, a rich complaint from someone who sucked the oxygen out of every room she entered. I could hear her breathing, soft and rhythmic. The crisis of the birthday dinner. The screaming about how my turning 18 meant I would leave her. The manufactured panic attack that had forced my parents to abandon my cake to comfort her. It was all gone. She was sleeping, the sleep of the absolved. She had won again, reclaiming the center of the universe, and was now resting peacefully in it. I felt a flash of anger, hot and sharp, but I extinguished it instantly. Anger required energy. Anger was a tether. I couldn't afford to be tethered to her anymore. I didn't close her door. I didn't whisper a goodbye. I simply turned my head and kept walking. Passing my parents' room was harder. The door was shut tight. Through the wood, I could hear the deep rumbling snore of my father. My mother would be curled next to him, likely exhausted from the emotional gymnastics of the evening. They weren't bad people, I told myself, clutching the strap of my bag tighter. They were just blind. They had been looking at the son of Chloe Boyu as needs for so long that everything else was just a spot in their peripheral vision. If I stayed, I would eventually fade completely. I was saving myself from erasure. I reached the bottom of the stairs and moved into the kitchen. The moonlight turned the countertops into slabs of grey marble. The remains of the day were still there, the sink full of unwashed dishes from the chaotic dinner. My birthday cake, a store-bought vanilla sponge, sat in its plastic container on the island. A single slice had been cut, then abandoned when Chloe started hyperventilating. I stared at the cake. Happy birthday, Evelyn. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the note I had written 3 times before getting the wording right. I didn't want to leave a manifesto. I didn't want to list their failures. That would only invite a rebuttal, a defense I wouldn't be there to hear, but could vividly imagine. I'm safe. I need to be on my own. Please don't try to find me. I'll contact you when I'm ready. Evelyn. I placed the note on top of the plastic cake lid. It was impossible to miss. They would find it when they came down for coffee, in that groggy morning haze before the drama of the day began. By then, I would be gone. I moved to the back door. The front door was too risky. The hinges needed oiling. The back door, leading out through the utility room, was the silent exit. I unlocked the deadbolt. It slid back with a heavy thunk that sounded like a gunshot in the silence. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs, waiting for a shout, a light, footsteps. 5 seconds. 10. The house breathed on. I turned the handle and pushed. The cool night air rushed in to meet me, smelling of wet pavement and distant rain. It was a stark contrast to the stale, overheated air of the house. I stepped over the threshold, the rubber sole of my sneaker hitting the concrete patio. I gently, agonizingly, slowly pulled the door closed behind me. I couldn't slam it. I couldn't make a scene. This had to be a disappearance, not an explosion. The latch clicked, a tiny metallic sound that signified the end of the world I knew. Click. I stood on the patio for a moment, the bag heavy on my shoulder. The backyard was bathed in shadows. The swing set where Chloe used to push me off looked skeletal in the dark. I turned away from it. I walked down the side path, unlatching the gate. As I stepped onto the sidewalk, the streetlights hummed overhead, casting pools of sodium orange light on the asphalt. The street was empty. The suburbs were asleep, unaware that one of their fixtures had come loose. I began to walk. At first, my legs felt stiff, as if they were waiting for a command to stop, to turn around. Go back. A voice whispered, the voice of habit, of fear, of the daughter who did what she was told. Go back and apologize for worrying them. Make breakfast. Be good. I walked faster. The rhythm of my footsteps on the pavement became a mantra. Left, right, away. Left, right, away. I wasn't walking aimlessly. I knew the schedule. The intercity bus terminal was 3 miles away. The first bus to the capital left at 4:45 a.m. It was the red eye for commuters and drifters. I had checked the schedule on my phone under the covers 2 nights ago, terrified that the light of the screen would give me away. The further I got from the house, the lighter the air seemed to get. The tightness in my chest, a constant companion for as long as I could remember, began to loosen. It was terrifying. The world was enormous, dark, and indifferent. I had no job, no apartment, and no safety net. I was walking into a void. But as I turned the corner at the end of our street, blocking the view of the house from my sight completely, I took a deep, shuddering breath. The air tasted cold. It tasted sharp. It tasted like mine. I adjusted the strap on my shoulder, put my head down against the wind, and walked into the dark. I wasn't Evelyn the daughter, or Evelyn the sister, or Evelyn the shadow. For the first time, in the quiet solitude of the sleeping town, I was just Evelyn, and that, I decided, was enough to start with. The mattress in the small studio apartment on 4th Street had a distinct valley in the center, a permanent memory of whoever had slept there before me. It smelled faintly of stale lavender and old dust, a scent that was entirely foreign, yet arguably the sweetest thing I had ever inhaled. I lay there for a long time, staring at the water stain on the ceiling that looked vaguely like a map of a country that did not exist. 3 weeks. It had been 3 weeks since the door clicked shut behind me. I rolled out of the hollow, the spring squeaking a rusty protest. My feet hit the linoleum floor, which was cold enough to send a shock up my calves. I didn't mind the cold. In this room, the temperature was a fact of physics, not a reflection of my mother's mercurial moods, or the icy silence that usually followed Chloe's tantrums. The routine was still forming, fragile as spun sugar. I walked to the kitchenette, a generous term for a sink, a hot plate, and a mini fridge humming aggressively in the corner, and filled the kettle. The tap water here in Oakhaven tasted metallic, harder than the water back home, but it washed down the dry toast just fine. I had 22 minutes before I had to leave for the shifts ID picked up at The Daily Grind, a coffee shop 3 blocks away. I sat on the single wobbly chair by the window, counting the change in my wallet. The silence in the room was heavy, but it wasn't predatory. Back home, silence was a held breath, a prelude to an explosion. Here, silence was just the absence of noise. It was empty. It was mine. Keys, wallet, name tag, I whispered to myself, checking my pockets. The sound of my own voice startled me. I was still learning that I was allowed to make sound without permission. The walk to the cafe was a sensory assault I was slowly getting used to. The city wasn't huge, but compared to the suburban stagnation I'd left, it felt alive. I navigated the cracked sidewalks, stepping over puddles reflecting the grey morning sky. I kept my head down, shoulders hunched forward, a posture carved into my spine over 18 years of trying to be invisible. I had to consciously force my shoulders back, reminding myself that no one here was looking for me. No one here knew that I was the fixer, the scapegoat, the eternal second choice. To the people of Oak Haven, I was just the girl who burned the milk if she got distracted. The bell above the door chimed as I entered the humid warmth of the shop. The air was thick with the scent of roasted beans and sanitizer. "You're early again, Evie," Hattie called out from behind the espresso machine. She was a woman built of sharp angles and soft sweaters, with graying hair tied back in a severe bun that contradicted her easy laugh. "Sorry," I said instinctively, the word tumbling out before I could catch it. Hattie paused, a portafilter in one hand, looking at me over the rim of her glasses. "Stop that. You're allowed to be early. You're allowed to be late. Well, within reason, but you're not allowed to apologize for existing. We talked about this." I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. "Right, I know. Habit, bad habit," she grunted, banging the filter against the knockbox. "Apron on. We've got a rush coming. The 8:15 bus just dropped off." The next 2 hours were a blur of steam, ceramics, and forced interactions. I operated on autopilot, a state of being I had perfected during family dinners. Listen, anticipate, serve. But the stakes were lower here. If I messed up an order, a stranger might be annoyed for 30 seconds. If I messed up at home, Chloe would spend 3 days making sure I felt the repercussions. Around 10 o'clock, the rush thinned out. I was wiping down the counter, scrubbing at a stubborn coffee ring, when my elbow knocked a glass jar of sugar straws off the ledge. It hit the floor with a catastrophic shatter, glass and paper exploding across the black and white tiles. I froze, my heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. The noise seemed deafening, a gunshot in a library. I immediately dropped to my knees, my hands shaking, waiting for the yelling. I waited for the accusation that I was clumsy, thoughtless, ruining everything. "Look what you did, Evelyn! Can't you do anything right?" My mother's voice echoed in my head so clearly I flinched. "Whoops," Hattie said from the back office doorway. She walked over, broom in hand. I scrambled to pick up the shards with my bare hands. "I'm so sorry, Hattie. I'll pay for it. I can stay late. I didn't mean to—" "Hey, hey!" Hattie's voice was sharp, cutting through my panic. She grabbed my wrist gently, stopping me from slicing my fingers on a jagged piece of glass. "Evelyn, stop!" I looked up at her, my breathing shallow. "I'm sorry." "It's a jar, kid. It cost $4 at a restaurant supply store. And don't pick up glass with your hands, for Christ's sake." She handed me the broom, her expression softening not into pity, but into a calm practicality. "Sweep it up, throw it out. Get a new jar from the back. The world keeps turning." I stared at the broom handle in my hand. The world keeps turning. No crisis, no 3-hour lecture on my incompetence, no tears from a sister claiming the noise hurt her head. Just a broken jar and a broom. "Okay," I breathed out, the adrenaline slowly leaving my system, leaving me lightheaded. "Okay." I swept the glass. The rhythmic swish-swish of the bristles against the floor was grounding. I was learning that mistakes could just be mistakes, not moral failings. By the time my shift ended, the sun had broken through the clouds, casting long, sharp shadows across the street. I walked home with my tips in my pocket, $12, enough for laundry and maybe a piece of fruit. When I unlocked the door to my apartment, the silence greeted me again. I locked the deadbolt and the chain, a ritual that made me feel safe. I stripped off my coffee-stained uniform and pulled on an oversized t-shirt I'd bought at a thrift store. It was ugly, a faded neon orange with a band logo I didn't recognize. And I loved it because Chloe wouldn't be caught dead in it. I sat on the floor with a bowl of instant noodles, the steam warming my face. I had a book open on my lap, a novel about a woman traveling across the sea. I was reading for pleasure, not for a school assignment, not to help Chloe with a report she'd procrastinated on, just for me. My phone buzzed on the floor beside me. The vibration against the wood floor sounded like a drill. My stomach dropped. I knew that buzz. I had set my phone to do not disturb for everyone except my employer, but I hadn't blocked the numbers yet. I couldn't bring myself to do it. A sick, twisted part of me needed to know they noticed I was gone. I picked it up. The screen lit up the dim room. Chloe. It wasn't a missed call. It was a text. I stared at the name, the letters blurring slightly as my vision swam. The old reflex kicked in. The urge to fix, to soothe, to apologize. My thumb hovered over the screen. Opens message. Chloe. Mom's been crying for 3 hours. She can't find the pearl earrings. The ones Grandma gave her. Did you take them? Seriously, Evie, this isn't funny anymore. Come home and help me look. I have a headache and I can't deal with her. I read it once, twice, 3 times. The audacity of it took my breath away. No. Are you okay? No. Where are you? Not even a... We miss you. Just an accusation and a demand for labor. I closed my eyes, leaning my head back against the wall. I could see the scene perfectly. Mom, likely sprawled on the chaise lounge, weeping theatrically about the earrings she probably lost herself weeks ago. Chloe, standing in the doorway, rolling her eyes but feeding off the drama, needing an audience and a servant to mitigate the fallout. They didn't want me. They wanted the buffer. They wanted the sponge that soaked up the toxic spill of their emotions so they didn't have to drown in it themselves. I looked at the phone again. Chloe. Hello? I know you're reading this. Don't be a bitch. Just tell me where they are so I can get her to shut up. My hand trembled. The pull was physical. A hook in my gut dragging me back to that house. I could type a reply. I could say, check the porcelain bowl in the foyer. She always leaves them there. I knew exactly where they were. I could solve the problem from 300 miles away. I could make the crying stop. But if I did that, I would be back in the periphery. I would be the ghost haunting my own life, intervening only to make their narrative smoother. I thought about the broken sugar jar. I thought about Hattie saying, the world keeps turning. I realized then that their world would keep turning without me, or it wouldn't. And if it crashed and burned, if they consumed each other in the vacuum of my absence, that was not my fault. It was not my burden. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of dust and freedom. I didn't block the number. That felt too much like running away. Instead, I did something harder. I typed nothing. I swiped the notification away. I placed the phone face down on the floor, the screen going dark against the linoleum. The silence returned, but the quality of it had changed. It wasn't empty anymore. It was solid. It was a barrier I had erected, brick by brick, moment by moment. I picked up my fork and twirled a mess of noodles. I took a bite. It was salty and warm. Outside, a siren wailed in the distance, fading as it moved away from me. I turned the page of my book, my finger steady. The words on the page came into focus, crisp and black against the white paper. I read the first sentence of the new chapter, whispering it aloud to the empty room, just to hear the sound of my own voice claiming the space. The horizon was vast, I read, and she walked toward it without looking back. I took another bite of dinner. I let the phone sit there, a dark, silent stone. Let them look for the earrings. Let them scream into the void. I was busy. I was living. The radiator in my studio apartment clanked with a rhythmic metallic stutter, a sound that might have driven someone else mad. To me, it was music. It was the percussion section of a space that belonged entirely to me. There were no screaming matches echoing from the hallway, no shattering glass, no frantic pounding on my door, demanding I fix a catastrophe I hadn't created. Just the heat, the hum of the refrigerator, and the distant, muffled traffic of a city that didn't know my name. I sat cross-legged on the rug I had bought 3 weeks ago. It was a deep, rich teal, a color Chloe would have called hideous, which was exactly why I picked it. Beside me, a mug of Earl Grey tea sent up a lazy spiral of steam. I watched the vapor twist and dissipate in the morning light, filtering through the singular, grime-streaked window. 6 months. It had been 6 months since I packed that bag. The calendar on the wall was marked not with family obligations or dread-filled anniversaries, but with deadlines for my introduction to literature course at the community college and my shift schedule at the bookstore. Today was Tuesday. Tuesdays meant an early shift followed by a seminar on modernist fiction. I stood up, the floorboards creaking beneath my bare feet. My movements were no longer rushed, no longer hunched with the anticipation of a blow, verbal or otherwise. I walked to the small mirror leaning against the wall. The face staring back was familiar, yet fundamentally altered. The perpetual dark circles had softened, the tension in the jaw unclenched. I looked like someone who slept through the night. "Okay," I whispered to the empty room. "Page 84. I picked up my bag, a sturdy leather satchel I'd found at a thrift store, and headed out. The air in the hallway smelled faintly of floor wax and old onions, a sensory imprint of the building's collective life. I locked the door behind me. The click of the deadbolt was a physical affirmation. Safe. Mine. The walk to the bookstore was a study in sensory overload that I was slowly learning to curate. The rumble of the subway beneath the grate, the sharp scent of roasting coffee from the bodega, the blur of faces. For years I had walked with my head down, trying to make myself invisible, a ghost in my own timeline. Now I forced my chin up. I met the eyes of a woman, walking a golden retriever. She smiled. I smiled back. A tiny, inconsequential interaction that felt like a victory. At the bookstore, the bell chimed as I pushed through the heavy oak door. The smell of paper and dust was a sedative. Mr. Henderson, the owner, was behind the counter, wrestling with a stack of invoices. "Evelyn," he grunted, not looking up, though his tone was warm. "The shipment from the distributor is late. Again. If anyone asks for the new release, tell them the universe is conspiring against literacy." I chuckled, sliding my bag behind the counter. "I'll tell them it's building suspense, Mr. Henderson. Marketing strategy." He looked up then, peering over his spectacles. "You're in a good mood, Paperdew. Handed it in yesterday," I said, grabbing my pricing gun. "Today we discuss Mrs. Dalloway." "Ah, Clarissa and her flowers," he mused. "Buy them yourself, Evelyn. Always buy the flowers yourself." "I intend to." The morning passed in a blur of shelving and quiet conversations. Around noon, a customer approached me near the biography section. She was a young woman, roughly my age, looking harried. Her phone was buzzing incessantly in her hand, and she looked on the verge of tears. "Excuse me," she stammered. "Do you have... I need something for a gift. My sister, she's having a hard time and I don't know what to do." The phone in her hand lit up with a text. I couldn't help but glance down. "Answer me," the preview read. A cold phantom of the past brushed against my spine. I knew that vibration. I knew the panic of the demanding sibling, the weight of being the emotional anchor for a ship that refused to stop sinking. I took a slow breath, grounding myself in the smell of old paper. "Is she a reader?" I asked, my voice steady. "Not really," the girl admitted, wiping her eye. She needs so much attention. I thought a book might distract her." I looked at this stranger, seeing a mirror image of the girl I used to be. The urge to fix it for her, to offer advice, to project my trauma onto her situation was strong. But I stopped. I wasn't her savior. I was just the clerk. "Try the art section," I said gently, pointing toward the back. Sometimes, when things are loud, looking at something beautiful helps more than reading words. She looked at me, really looked at me, and exhaled. "Thank you. That makes sense." She walked away. I didn't follow her. I didn't worry about whether she found the book or if her sister stopped texting. I turned back to the shelf I was organizing. The boundary held. The sky didn't fall. By the time I reached the campus later that afternoon, the sky had turned a bruised purple, threatening rain. I loved the weather here. It was dramatic and indifferent, unlike the stifling, airless heat of my childhood home. The classroom was small, filled with mismatched desks and the smell of dry erase markers. There were 12 of us. We sat in a loose circle. Professor Ares, a woman with wild grey hair and an intense stare, sat at the head. "Evelyn," she said, startling me. "You had a thought on the ending? You mentioned in your notes that Clarissa's party felt like a funeral." My heart gave a familiar, violent kick against my ribs. The instinct to deflect, to murmur something non-committal, and fade into the beige walls surged. "Don't speak. If you speak, you take up space. If you take up space, you'll be targeted." I gripped the edge of my desk. The wood was cool, varnished, real. I wasn't in the kitchen listening to Chloe scream about a ruined dress. I was in a place of learning, and I had paid for this seat with money I earned. My voice cracked. I cleared my throat and started again, louder this time. "I think the party is a performance. She gathers everyone together to prove she exists, to validate her own life through their eyes. But in the end, she's still alone in the room. The noise of the party just highlights the silence inside her." The room was quiet. I braced myself for dismissal, for someone to interrupt me. "Interesting," a guy named Marcus said, leaning forward. "So you think the connection is fake?" "Not fake," I said, the words coming easier now, flowing like water from a tap finally turned on. "Just orchestrated. She's the conductor, but she's conducting a symphony for an audience that isn't really listening. She has to learn to listen to the music herself." Professor Arvis smiled, a small, sharp thing. "Precisely, the internal symphony." "Well put, Evelyn." The discussion moved on, but the warmth of that moment lingered in my chest. I had spoken. I had been heard. My thoughts, which had been dismissed as irrelevant for 18 years, were now currency. When class ended, Marcus caught up to me in the hallway. "Hey, that was a cool take," he said, shifting his backpack. "I never thought about it like that. I usually just think she's kind of shallow." "She is," I said, walking toward the exit. "But she's trying to survive her own life. I think we all do that." "You heading to the station?" he asked. "No," I said, checking my watch. "I have one more stop." "All right. See you Thursday, Evelyn." "See you, Marcus." I walked out into the cool evening air. The rain had started, a fine mist that clung to my eyelashes. I walked 3 blocks to a small corner market. This was the ritual, the final movement of the day. I wandered the aisles, picking up ingredients: fresh basil, a carton of heavy cream, a box of pasta, a bottle of cheap sparkling water. I wasn't cooking for a family of 4 with contradictory dietary restrictions and complaints about the salt level. I was cooking for Evelyn. At the checkout, I saw a bucket of flowers near the register, white hydrangeas wrapped in brown paper. "Buy the flowers yourself." I placed them on the belt. Back in the apartment, the transformation began. I locked the world out. I took off my wet shoes and switched on the string of fairy lights I had draped over the bookshelf. I put a record on the turntable I bought at a garage sale. Chopin, Nocturnes. The piano notes drifted through the small room, melancholic but beautiful. I unwrapped the flowers and trimmed the stems, placing them in a mason jar on the windowsill. They looked bright against the gloom of the city night outside. I moved to the kitchenette. The act of cooking was a meditation, chopping the garlic, the sharp, pungent aroma filling the air, watching the butter melt in the pan, golden and bubbling. I was conducting this. The heat, the timing, the flavors, it was all under my control. While the pasta boiled, I sat by the window and pulled out my journal. For years, my diary had been a record of grievances, a catalogue of how I had been wronged, how I had been ignored. Reading back through old entries was like reading the transcript of a prisoner. I turned to a fresh page. Today, I wrote, "The rain felt like a baptism. I spoke in class. I didn't apologize for my opinion. I bought hydrangeas." I paused, the pen hovering over the paper. The silence of the apartment wasn't empty anymore. It was full. It was heavy with potential. My phone resting on the table lit up. A notification from social media. A memory from 1 year ago. I stared at the screen. The thumbnail showed a chaotic dinner table. Chloe was in the center, mouth open in mid-shout, tears streaming down her face because the cake wasn't the right shade of pink. In the corner of the frame, barely visible, was my shoulder, just a fragment of a person. I looked at that image, the noise of it almost audible through the screen, and then I looked around my room. The contrast was so sharp, it almost hurt. I remembered the fear that had gripped me when I first packed that bag, the terror of the unknown. I had thought that without them I would disappear. I thought my existence was defined by my utility to them. If I wasn't fixing Chloe's mess, who was I? If I wasn't soothing my mother's nerves, did I matter? I took a sip of the sparkling water. The bubbles bit pleasantly at my tongue. I mattered because I was here. I existed in the quiet moments. I existed in the choice of teal rugs and Earl Grey tea. I existed in the analysis of Virginia Woolf and the smile of a stranger. I deleted the notification. Then I went a step further. I navigated to the settings and disabled the memories feature entirely. I didn't need the algorithm to remind me of who I used to be. I was too busy meeting the person I was becoming. The timer on the stove dinged. I drained the pasta, tossing it with the cream sauce and the fresh basil. I plated it in a ceramic bowl I had made in a pottery workshop last month. It was lopsided, imperfect, and glazed a brilliant, uneven blue. It was the most beautiful thing I owned. I sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker on, a grid of golden stars against the concrete. I took a bite of the food. It was rich, creamy, and exactly salty enough. A car horn blared below, followed by a siren. The city was a chaotic, noisy, messy orchestra. But up here, in my sanctuary, I held the baton. I thought about the symphony of my life. For 18 years, I had been a muted instrument, forced to play only the notes that supported someone else's solo. I had been the background hum, the unnoticed rhythm. Not anymore. I tapped my fork against the side of the blue bowl. Clink. A clear, resonant sound. I closed my eyes and listened. I could hear the hum of the fridge, the hiss of the radiator, the rain against the glass, and the steady, strong rhythm of my own heart. The prelude was over. The curtain had risen, and for the first time in the history of my life, the stage was empty of everyone but me. I took another bite, savoring the taste of my own independence, and let the music begin.